Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit. Because apart from me, you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Jesus says, I am the vine, and you are the branches. And we have a good example of how this is so in our first lesson from the Acts of the Apostles. Philip has been bearing fruit, proclaiming the good news of Jesus in Samaria and baptizing many people there. And now he's at it again after receiving his assignment from an angel to head down a wilderness road that runs from Jerusalem to Gaza. He doesn't question why, he just goes. I don't know about you, but my ears pricked up upon hearing Gaza mentioned in our lesson this morning. Since October 7th of last year, Gaza has been on the world stage. This week, our nation's, it's been going for a few weeks, our nation's college campuses have been erupting in protest, I think even more so this week, over Israel's massive military response to the Hamas terrorists emerging from Gaza to conduct their murderous rampage and abduction of hostages. In our text, though, Gaza is just a geographical marker. It lies in the direction one would travel if going from Jerusalem back home to Ethiopia. So let's leave Gaza behind for the moment. We're introduced here to a high-ranking, wealthy Ethiopian eunuch in charge of all of the queen's treasury. He's headed home after worshiping in Jerusalem. So he might have been Jewish, but more likely a God-fearer, drawn to worship the God of Israel. And he must have been literate and pretty well-to-do, for a scroll of Isaiah in either Hebrew or Greek would have set him back a bit. As a eunuch, he may have also been ostracized and excluded, considered by others to be less than a man, unclean, unfit to enter the Jewish temple proper. I find it significant that he was reading from the suffering servant section of Isaiah. I wonder how his own experience might have intersected with what he was reading. Philip, prompted by the Spirit, runs up to the chariot, hears him reading, and asks him if he understands. He's then invited into the chariot to teach him. Philip springboards off of Isaiah's description of the suffering servant to share the good news of Jesus with him. As they go along, they come to some water, and the eunuch asks, "What is to prevent me from being baptized?" Debbie Thomas invites us to spend some time reflecting on what the eunuch is asking with his zinger of a question. What is to prevent me from belonging to the family of God? What is to prevent me from being welcomed as Christ's own? What is to prevent me from full participation in the risen life and community of Jesus? What is to prevent me from breaking down those entrenched barriers, fences, walls, and obstacles that have kept me at an agonizing arm's length from the God I yearn for? What is to prevent me from becoming not merely a hearer of the good news, but an integral part of the good news of resurrection? Debbie goes on to highlight the resounding silence that follows the eunuch's question. Because the silence speaks what words cannot. The silence is thundering, gorgeous and seismic and right. Because the answer to his question is silence. The answer, the only answer is nothing. In the post-resurrection world, in the world where the Spirit of God moves where and how she will, drawing all of creation to herself, in the world where the Word lives to defeat death, alienation, isolation, and fear, there's nothing to prevent a beloved image bearer of God from entering into the fullness of Christ's salvation. Nothing whatsoever. At Emmanuel, we've made it one of the pillars of our life together. We welcome all. Nothing prevents any who have been created in God's image to experience the acceptance, love, and freedom that comes through being a part of the body of Christ. And note in our text how it's the eunuch that stops the chariot by the water. And Philip doesn't say a word, but follows him down to the water and baptizes him. The Spirit then whisks Philip away to the coast to continue his preaching mission and bear even more fruit. This is how Luke initially shared the story of this encounter. But later manuscripts reveal how someone along the way copying this text was very uncomfortable with it. And if you even look closely at our text that we have printed in the bulletin, you'll notice there's no 37th verse. Most Bibles include it in the footnotes, noting that other ancient texts added this or had this verse, and it was a later verse, a later edition. Yes, there were some gatekeepers in the early church uncomfortable with the silence that followed the eunuch's question. So they added to the original story, and they have Philip answer, "If you believe with all your heart, you may," when he asked whether he can be baptized. And the eunuch replies, "Well, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God." All throughout the history of Christianity, there have been similar gatekeepers determining what is accepted belief and what is heresy. But what if? What if the life of faith isn't so much a thought-out statement of what one believes as it is a freeing, life-giving, ever-evolving relationship? What if it's more about loving because we've first been loved? What if it's more about a dying and rising pattern of baptismal living than being able to correctly spout what one believes? What if it's more about being like a branch on a vine and allowing the sap of love to flow through us in order to bear fruit in our broken and hurting world? I prefer Luke's original version of this story, in which silence and action are the answer to the eunuch's question. And as I pondered this story, two other features stood out for me to connect this eunuch's baptism to Jesus. At Jesus' own baptism, the Spirit also showed up, just like it did to take Philip away. And at Jesus' birth, after those shepherds had come to see the newborn babe, they went on their way rejoicing, as did the eunuch following his baptism into Christ. There isn't much rejoicing these days in Gaza, with over 30,000 people dead from the war, many of them women and children. And on top of that trauma, there's hunger as humanitarian food aid has been limited and risky. It strikes me that one particular verse from the portion of Isaiah that the eunuch was reading applies to the Palestinian people in Gaza. So I'll transpose it from singular to plural. In their humiliation, justice was denied them. Who can describe their generation? For their lives are taken away from the earth. Many branches connected to the vine of Christ are speaking out in protest of the injustice, desiring to bear the fruits of freedom, dignity, healing, and abundant life for all who are oppressed. And for those of us connected to the vine of love, we can't demonize the oppressors, for we recognize that their only way to freedom and abundant life will be to amend their ways. Yet there are no easy solutions to the complexities of war and acts of terrorism. Who knows what will even result from the current protests? What will bring the needed winds of change? What role might we play in bearing the fruit of God's love in such situations? How might we be in solidarity with both Palestinians and Israelis? The 3rd and 4th century historian Eusebius tells us that Ethiopian eunuch returned to his country, became an evangelist, and converted many there. Thus, on that road from Jerusalem to Gaza, a new fruit-bearing branch was grafted into the vine. 8 times in a section of 4 verses from our gospel text, Jesus speaks about abiding, staying connected. With each breath we take, we're connected to this infinite, eternal source of love. Our abiding allows this love of God to flow through us, just like the miracle of life flows through a branch to bear fruit. Jesus says that without him, without this connection, we can do nothing. Abiding is the key to our faithful living. Believing often arises out of one's abiding. It's more a trusting in the connection than being able to recite correct doctrine. It's about being a branch, abiding in the vine, and letting that love flow. Abiding heals our sorrows and fills us with joy. And when we're connected to the vine, we also have that freedom, Jesus says, to ask for whatever we wish, and it'll be granted, because it will be in line with God's love for us and for the world. Yes, Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. So let's continue to welcome all into our life together. Let's be open to the Spirit's promptings. Let's die and rise in a daily remembrance of our baptism. Let's stay connected, abide in the vine, our awesome, wondrous source of love. And then let's go forth to bear the fruits of justice, peace, and abundant life that our world so desperately needs. What is to prevent us?